Dear listeners, just imagine for a moment. A little girl stands alone in the heart of a dense forest, swallowed by thick fog. Her hands tremble, tears streak down her cheeks, and before her lies a glowing garden no human has ever seen. Hundreds of butterflies float silently beneath golden light, but one, glowing white with shimmering blue edges, flies straight into the wounds buried deep in her heart. For the first time in her young life, her sorrow begins to melt. But this strange, beautiful moment hides something darker. Something that could shatter everything she dares to hope for. But before we continue with the story, please support this channel by liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. Your support means everything to us and gives us more strength to keep sharing powerful stories like this one. Oh, and don't forget to check in down in the comments. Let us know where you're listening from. We'd love to see how far our stories have reached. Now let's get back to the story. In a small village far away from the chaos of cities, nestled between misty hills and a forest so thick it seemed to whisper secrets, lived a quiet little girl named Lena. She was just 10 years old. But behind her young eyes was a sadness far too deep for someone her age. A year ago, Lena had lost her mother to an illness that no one could cure. Since then, everything in her world had changed. The house that once rang with laughter now echoed with silence. Her father, who used to hold her close and tell her stories, had turned cold and distant. He barely spoke, barely looked at her. It was as if when her mother died, he had buried his heart with her. Lena didn't complain. She didn't cry in front of him. She just disappeared a little more each day. After school, while other children played or ran through the fields, Lena would walk to the edge of the forest. She would sit for hours, staring into the trees, listening to the wind rustle the leaves, waiting for something, though she didn't know what. Then one quiet, gray afternoon, everything changed. The air was thick with the scent of rain. Lena walked with her head down, her feet dragging when something caught her eye. A row of small white flowers stretched out in a perfect line across the ground, glowing ever so faintly, as if lit from within. They led straight into the forest. Without knowing why, Lena followed them. With each step deeper into the woods, the noise of the world faded away. There were no birds singing, no twigs snapping, only the sound of her own breath and the beating of her heart. And then she saw it. An archway made of twisted vines stood tall before her. It looked like nature itself had crafted a gate, just for her. She stepped through. On the other side, time seemed to stop. It was a garden, an impossible garden. Trees shimmered gold beneath a soft, glowing sky. Flowers swayed to an unseen rhythm, and the air was filled with music that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. And in the center of it all, butterflies. They floated like tiny stars. Some were golden, others violet, some as red as fire. But one stood out from the rest. It was white with glowing blue edges, and it flew gently toward her. The butterfly landed on her hand, and in that instant everything changed. A warmth spread through her fingers, up her arm and into her chest. It wasn't just physical warmth. It was the kind that touched her soul. Her pain, her loneliness, the heavy weight she had carried for so long, began to lift. Tears spilled from her eyes, not from grief this time, but from something else. Relief. The butterfly, whose name she somehow knew was Kiri, didn't speak with words, but she felt its thoughts, its emotions. Kiri showed her flashes of old memories. Her mother's laugh, the soft touch of her hands, the songs she used to sing at bedtime. For the first time since her mother's death, Lena smiled. She came back to the garden the next day. And the day after that. It became her secret world. A place where her heart didn't hurt. A place where she didn't feel forgotten. She met other butterflies, each with a name, each with a gift. some eased sadness, some softened anger, some quieted fear. Every visit helped her breathe a little easier. But she told no one about it. Not even her father. She knew what he would say, that it wasn't real, that she was imagining things. He didn't believe in magic anymore. He barely believed in anything at all. And as her visits to the garden healed her, her father began to notice something changing. Lena smiled more, her eyes looked brighter. But instead of joy, it filled him with suspicion. Where was she going? What was she hiding? One evening he followed her. He didn't call out. He stayed far enough behind that Lena never noticed. He watched her enter the forest, watched her vanish between the trees. And when he saw the faint glow of the vines forming an archway in the distance, something inside him twisted. He remembered that glow. He had seen it once before. Long ago, before his heart had turned to stone. But he didn't understand. Not yet. Lena did not know she was being followed. As she stepped through the vine-covered arch and disappeared into the glowing garden, her father remained hidden behind the thick brush. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. His name was Darman, a man who had once been full of light, someone who used to sing while tending the garden behind their old house, who danced with his daughter in the kitchen on rainy mornings, and who held his wife's hands as if they were the most precious thing in the world. But all of that had vanished the day his wife died. Darman had not just lost a partner. He had lost his sense of direction, his reason to smile. Grief did not come to him like a storm. It came slowly, like a quiet fire eating through the walls of his heart. Every day he felt less and less like himself until eventually, he forgot what joy felt like. And when Lena tried to reach him, he pushed her away. Not because he did not love her, but because he feared breaking even more. Now, hiding behind a tree, he watched his daughter slip into something he could not understand. A soft glow wrapped around the garden like a dream, and he squinted through the leaves, trying to make sense of what he saw. The butterflies shimmered like floating fireflies, but calmer, more deliberate. The flowers danced without wind, and the trees swayed to a rhythm that didn't belong to this world. He stepped closer, and that was when he saw her. Lena was laughing, a sound he hadn't heard in months. She spun in a circle with her arms open, and the white butterfly with blue-edged wings circled around her, almost as if it were trying to hug her. He had never seen her look like that, not even before her mother died. It was as if something inside her had opened again, something he didn't know how to reach anymore. His chest tightened. He stepped back, unsure of what to feel. Was this garden some kind of trick? Had his daughter found a way to run from reality while he stayed stuck in it? The thought burned. He wanted to pull her out, drag her home, lock the door. But another part of him, quieter, more fragile, wanted to step into that garden too. He didn't. Not yet. That night, Darman didn't ask Lena where she had been. He simply watched her as she quietly helped prepare dinner, her fingers humming against the wooden spoon, her eyes soft with a peace he did not understand. And it made him angry. Not at her, but at the world that had taken away his wife, and now gave his daughter something he couldn't see. Over the following days he continued to watch. Every afternoon, Lena would disappear into the woods. She grew lighter, her smile more frequent. Even her sleep seemed deeper, calmer. And the more she changed, the more distant Darman felt. Then came the day it was too much to bear. Rain was pouring, heavy and loud, but Lena still left the house. Darman followed. Through the storm, through the mud, until he stood once again before the vine arch that glowed faintly even in the rain. This time he did not stop. He stepped through. The light stung his eyes at first. The golden trees shimmered through the fog of rain, the petals of flowers blinking like stars. And the butterflies, so many of them, danced around him in slow, graceful swirls. But he felt nothing. No warmth, no peace, only cold. Lena turned and saw him. Her face fell. "Papa! What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice small. Darman did not answer. His eyes scanned the garden, then rested on Kiri, the white butterfly who hovered protectively near Lena's shoulder. "This place," he said slowly. "What is it?" Lena looked down. "It's where I feel safe." "It's not real," Darman snapped. "It's a dream. And you're using it to forget." She shook her head. "No, it's real. They help me remember Mama. They help me feel again." Darman's hands clenched. "You don't need this to remember your mother. You don't need illusions." "It's not an illusion," Lena whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "It's healing me. Something you never let happen to yourself." The words struck harder than she could have known. Darman's body tensed. His face turned pale. And then, like a sudden storm, his rage took over. He stepped forward, swinging his arms at the butterflies, trying to chase them away. "Get out of here," he shouted. "Leave her alone." The garden seemed to recoil. Flowers closed, trees dimmed, and the butterflies scattered in fear. Lena screamed, running after Kiri, who tried to shield her with its wings. "Stop it," she cried. "You're hurting them." Darman didn't stop. His grief had taken the shape of fury, and he could not see past it. He knocked over a patch of glowing plants, sending sparks into the air. The garden trembled, and Lena fell to her knees. Then Kiri did something no butterfly should have done. It flew straight at Darman's chest and disappeared into him. Time froze. Darman gasped, stumbling backward. His eyes rolled back and he collapsed to the ground. Lena screamed. She ran to him, dropping beside his motionless body. "Papa! Papa, wake up!" Her hands trembled as she touched his face. "Please, please." But he did not move. And Kiri was gone. The garden fell into silence. The colors faded. The butterflies hovered far in the distance, afraid to come near. And Lena, sobbing, wrapped her arms around her father as the rain continued to pour from the sky like the heavens themselves were weeping. Hours passed. The rain finally slowed. And then a breath. Darman coughed, eyes fluttering open. His gaze was distant but soft. Tears streamed down his face. Not from pain but from something deeper. He saw her. Not just as the child she had become, but as the little girl who had once tugged at his sleeve to show him flowers. The girl who had crawled into bed with her stuffed animals when the thunder scared her. The girl who had lost her mother. And had nearly lost her father too. "I saw her," he whispered. "Your mother. She smiled at me." Lena nodded through her tears. "That was Kiri," she said. "She shared your heart with memories. Just like she did for me." Darman looked around the garden, now dull and colorless. "But where is she?" he asked. Lena glanced at the spot where Kiri had last hovered. There, lying still on a soft leaf, was a tiny cocoon, pulsing faintly with dim light. "She's sleeping," Lena whispered. "She gave you too much." Darman felt a deep ache in his chest, not from pain but from gratitude and shame. He had hurt the only place that had brought his daughter back to life, and now he owed her. He owed them. From that day he changed. Slowly. He and Lena returned to the garden each afternoon, not to escape but to care. Darman learned how to tend the glowing plants. He helped rebuild the sections he had destroyed. He apologized to the butterflies, and though they did not speak, they flew close to him again. But Kiri remained still in her cocoon. And deep in their hearts, both Lena and her father feared one thing more than anything else. What if she never woke up? What if the price of healing one broken soul was the fading of another? Their journey was far from over, and the real storm had not yet begun. Each day after school, Lena returned to the garden with her father. They walked side by side now, often in silence, but it was a different kind of silence, no longer heavy with grief, but with quiet understanding. Dharman still moved carefully, as if afraid he might break something, not only in the garden, but in his daughter. And Lena, though still healing, seemed more alive than she had in months. The garden, however, had begun to change. It was subtle at first. The shimmering trees that once glowed like warm lanterns were now dimmer. The music that floated gently from the flowers grew softer, thinner. The butterflies still danced, but fewer of them came close. And the once vibrant paths of blooming petals that greeted Lena each day now appeared dull, some even wilted. At the heart of the garden, resting on a leaf-shaped cradle, was Kiri's cocoon. It pulsed gently, its glow faint, as if caught between dreaming and disappearing. Lena sat beside it every afternoon. She spoke to it, told it stories, shared everything she felt and remembered. She cried, she sang, she begged. Sometimes her father joined her. Sometimes he simply watched from a distance, haunted by the sight of something he could not fix. The garden was wilting because Kiri was asleep. And Kiri was asleep because of him. Dharman tried to tell himself that he didn't know what he was doing when he attacked the garden. That grief had taken hold of him. That maybe Kiri's sacrifice was the only way he could finally feel again. But guilt clung to him like a second skin. One afternoon, Lena brought a small music box that used to belong to her mother. It was chipped, the paint fading, but when she wound it, the soft tune of her mother's lullaby played through the quiet air. She set it beside Kiri's cocoon and whispered, "This was Mama's favorite. Maybe you'll like it too." The melody drifted through the garden. Some of the nearby flowers perked up. A few butterflies flew closer, circling gently around the music box as if remembering something. But Kiri's cocoon remained still. The next day, Lena didn't come alone. She brought a notebook, full of drawings she had made of Kiri and the garden. She had stayed up late sketching them, trying to capture every detail, as if afraid they might vanish. Dharman helped her place the notebook beneath the tree where Kiri had first landed on her hand. He had begun to understand what this place meant, not just to Lena but to himself. This was not a fantasy. It was a mirror, a place that reflected everything they tried to hide. And yet, even as they poured love and memory into the garden, it continued to fade. The trees shed golden leaves that turned to dust when they touched the ground. The petals of the healing flowers curled inward, no longer singing. And the butterflies began to fly slower, like candle flames about to flicker out. Then came the wind. It arrived without warning, cold, strong, unnatural. It tore through the trees and sent a shiver through the ground. Lena grabbed her father's arm. The butterflies scattered, flying low, seeking shelter among the roots and hollow tree trunks. From the distance, the forest beyond the garden rustled with a sound they had never heard before. Not the whisper of wind, but a growl. Whoa. Ancient. Dharman stepped in front of Lena, his body tense. "We need to go," he whispered. "No," Lena said firmly, her eyes fixed on Kiri's cocoon. "I'm not leaving her." Another gust of wind howled through the trees. The vines at the edge of the garden began to wither. The archway through which they had always entered shrank and twisted, as if being pulled apart from the inside. And from that unraveling opening came a shadow. It moved like smoke but with weight, coiling and uncoiling across the ground. It had no eyes, no face, only a form that seemed to drink the light around it. Every step it took, the flowers died. Every breath it exhaled, the butterflies dropped from the air. Lena froze. She had never seen anything like it. The garden that had once healed her heart now felt like a battlefield. The shadow stopped near Kiri's cocoon. It did not touch it, but hovered silent as if watching. Lena stood, her fists clenched. "You can't take her." The shadow shifted but did not answer. Darman stepped forward, unsure if his body would obey him. "What is that?" he whispered. "I don't know," Lena said, her voice trembling. "But I feel it. It's pain." And she was right. The shadow was not a creature. It was what the garden had held at bay for all these years. It was sorrow, the kind that could not be spoken, only carried. The grief of lost mothers, forgotten children, shattered families. It had waited. And now, with Kiri asleep, it had found a way in. Lena took a deep breath. She stepped in front of the cocoon. "You can't have her," she said again, louder this time. "She saved me. She saved my papa." The shadow flinched just barely. And then a pulse. From Kiri's cocoon. Flicker of light. Small, faint. But there. The shadow drew back. It hissed, a sound like cracking ice, and recoiled a few steps. Then it slithered around them, circling Lena and her father like a vulture. The garden groaned under its weight, roots lifting from the ground, branches snapping. Darman picked up the music box and wound it. The lullaby played. Lena dropped to her knees and began to sing along, the words slow, trembling, filled with something the shadow could never understand. Love. The cocoon pulsed again. Brighter. The shadow hissed louder, twisting, panicked. The butterflies began to emerge from hiding, their wings dim but fluttering. And then came the voice. Not words, but a hum. Familiar, warm, full of memory. Kiri. Her cocoon split open in a sudden burst of light, and from within emerged a glowing form. No longer just a butterfly, but a being of shimmering wings and soft white fire. She hovered above the ground, her glow stronger than ever. The shadow screamed, and the garden answered. Vines reached up and wrapped around the darkness. Roots rose from the soil and coiled around its smoky limbs. The trees bent forward, their golden light returning in a rush. And the butterflies, all of them, rose into the sky, forming a circle of light. Kiri dove into the center of the storm. And just like that, the shadow was gone. Silence fell. Lena collapsed, breathless. Darman dropped beside her, arms around her shoulders. And Kiri floated gently down, her glow soft, fragile. She landed on Lena's hand once more. But something was different now. Her wings trembled. And her glow, though still beautiful, flickered. Lena looked up at her father. "She's not okay," she whispered. Darman looked at Kiri, then at the garden, and back to his daughter. "She saved us," he said. "Again. But at what cost?" The garden was no longer fading. Had been saved. Kiri. She was slowly disappearing. And this time it might be forever. The garden stood quiet. Not the silence of emptiness, but the kind that followed after something sacred had happened, after a storm had passed and left behind both beauty and ruin. The flowers had begun to bloom again, golden petals lifting like hands in prayer. The trees stood taller, their leaves humming a gentle tune. The butterflies danced in slow, delicate spirals above the glowing grass. But at the very center of it all, the brightest light had begun to dim. Kiri, the white butterfly who had healed hearts and carried the weight of sorrow in silence, now rested on Lena's palm with wings that flickered like a dying flame. She no longer floated effortlessly, and the shimmer that once wrapped her body like armor had become faint and transparent. Lena could feel it. Her heart ached, not with grief but with helplessness. "Please don't leave," she whispered, as if her breath could warm Kiri back to life. Darman knelt beside her. His eyes were fixed on Kiri, but also on his daughter, on how tightly she held the fragile creature against her chest. He had learned enough to understand that this moment was not meant for him to interrupt, so he waited, and watched, and listened. Kiri trembled once more, her wings folding gently before opening again, but this time they made no sound. There was no glow in their motion, no strength. She hovered for only a second before dropping lightly back into Lena's hands. "She gave everything," Lena said, her voice barely more than a breath. "She gave all of herself to stop the shadow." Darman nodded slowly. "And you gave her love," he said. "You brought her back once. Maybe there's a way again." Lena looked up, her eyes glassy. "She's not like before, Papa. Feel it. I feel how tired she is." Then she turned to the garden, her gaze moving across the trees, the flowers, the butterflies who had returned to their branches. "Is there anything here," she asked aloud, "that can save her? Anything that can bring her light back?" But there was no answer. Only wind. The butterflies fluttered but gave no direction. The flowers swayed, but held no magic that Lena hadn't already seen. The garden was alive again, but it was quiet, observing, waiting, offering no promise. Darman placed a hand on Lena's shoulder. "What if we tried something new?" he said gently. "What if the way to heal her doesn't live in this garden anymore?" Lena blinked slowly, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, rising to his feet and brushing his hands across the tree bark beside him, "maybe the answer is not in the magic she gave us, but in the life we bring back to her." Lena stood too, clutching Kiri close. Darman continued. "This place has always been where you came to heal, to remember, to feel. But maybe Kiri needs to see what she protected. Maybe she needs to be reminded of why she fought so hard." A strange thought began to grow inside Lena's chest, like a seed awakening in soil it never knew could be warm again. "Do you think if I took her home?" She hesitated, glancing down at Kiri's fragile body. "She'd remember why she saved us?" "She already remembers," Darman said. "But maybe she needs to see that her light was not wasted." Lena nodded, hesitant but resolved. They wrapped Kiri gently in one of Lena's old scarves, soft, pale yellow, the one her mother had knitted before she passed. It still carried her scent faintly, like rain and rosewood. Carefully they left the garden, stepping through the vine arch that now shimmered with steady light once again. The moment they stepped beyond its edge, the world outside felt heavier, duller. The breeze was colder. The forest lacked the golden hue of the garden. But Lena didn't care. She walked slowly, holding Kiri to her chest like a candle in a storm. At home, Darman opened the door for her, unsure if bringing the spirit of the garden into their quiet, grieving house would work, but hoping with all he had left that it would. Lena carried Kiri into the living room, where her mother's old chair still sat, untouched. The walls were plain. The air smelled like wood and memory. She placed Kiri gently on a folded blanket by the window, then ran to gather pieces of her mother's things. Books, a favorite mug, a photograph of the three of them before the sickness, before the silence. She surrounded Kiri with them. "This is the world you saved," she said softly. "This is the home you gave back to me." Darman brought the music box, winding it slowly. The lullaby played again, just as it had in the garden. The sound filled the room like breath. For hours they stayed like that, watching, remembering. hoping. At one point Lena sang. Not loud. Just a whisper. Her mother's favorite song. And as the sun began to dip behind the hills, casting amber light across the room, Kiri stirred. Her wings lifted slightly. Only a fraction. But it was enough. Lena gasped. Darman leaned forward. A faint glow returned to the edges of her wings. Still dim. Still fragile. But alive. The light was not the same as before. It was gentler now. Quieter. Not a power that could destroy shadows or restore gardens in one burst. But a light that had learned the beauty of being small and real. Kiri rose slowly, hovering just above the photograph Lena had placed beside her. Her glow reflected in the glass. Then she floated to Lena's shoulder, resting there as if she had always belonged. Lena felt warmth spread down her spine. She's not leaving, she said, her eyes wide. She's staying. Darman smiled faintly, tears collecting at the edges of his eyes. That night, Lena didn't return to the garden. She stayed home. With her father. With the music box. With the photographs and the laughter that finally returned. Kiri. The little butterfly who no longer had to carry all the pain alone. But even as they began to settle into their new peace, something stirred beneath the roots of the garden. Far from where the butterflies danced. Deep in the ground. Where even Kiri's light had not reached. There was still something waiting. Something ancient. Something that had not come for Lena. Nor for Darman. But for the garden itself. And it was no longer patient. In the days that followed, the house began to change. It wasn't loud or sudden. Just small things at first. Darman started cooking again. Often asking Lena what she wanted for dinner instead of silently reheating whatever he found. The kitchen, once thick with the cold smell of silence, now filled with the scent of warm broth and toasted bread. The hallway echoed with footsteps that no longer tried to disappear. And every night before Lena went to sleep, her father sat beside her bed, read one page of her favorite story, and stayed a while longer even after she had closed her eyes. Kiri, though still delicate, followed her throughout the day. She perched on the windowsill during breakfast, floated beside Lena while she brushed her hair, and rested on Darman's shoulder as he trimmed the garden behind the house. Her glow was soft now, no longer brilliant but calm, like the light of a candle in a quiet room. But even with this fragile peace blooming around them, Lena's dreams had begun to change. First they were just flickers, images, tree without leaves, a butterfly with torn wings, the sound of roots snapping beneath the earth. She would wake up gasping, holding her chest, unsure if the cold she felt was from the night air or something deeper. Darman noticed. He watched her eat less, grow quieter, glance out the window as if waiting for something. When he asked her, she only said, "I feel like something's calling me back." He didn't push her. He had learned not to force feelings into words. But he kept the lantern by the front door lit each night, just in case they had to leave again. And they did. On the 6th evening since Kiri's faint return, as the sun dipped behind the forest and painted the sky with ash-gray clouds, Lena stood in the doorway holding the yellow scarf. Kiri fluttered anxiously around her shoulder. "I have to go back," she said. Darman looked at her for a long time. He didn't ask why. He just nodded. They walked through the quiet forest, hand in hand, each step heavy with a feeling that something was watching. The trees were still. No birds sang. No crickets chirped. And when they arrived at the vine-covered archway, it was no longer glowing. It was dry, cracking. Lena reached out and touched it. The moment her fingers made contact, a pulse of dark energy rippled through the ground. Kiri shrank back, her wings trembling. Darman reached for Lena's hand. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I have to," Lena whispered. Together they stepped through. The garden no longer shimmered. The golden leaves had turned pale, almost gray. The once melodic flowers were closed, their colors dulled, and many butterflies had disappeared. Only a few hovered slowly, clinging to dying petals as if trying to comfort the fading place. Kiri floated forward, her glow flickering in the thickening gloom. Lena called out, "Hello! Is anyone here?" The garden did not answer. And then they heard it, a distant sound like breathing, but not the breathing of an animal. It was slower, heavier, came from below. Lena crouched to the ground, touching the soil. It was cold, damp, but beneath it she felt a rhythm, pulse, as if the very ground was alive, and something deep within it had awakened. "It's underneath," she said. Darman looked around. Under the garden. Kiri flew lower, hovering just above the earth near the center of the clearing. Her wings grew brighter, responding to something hidden. Then the ground split. A thin crack, no wider than a fingertip, tore through the garden's center. From within it, a black mist began to rise. It moved like a serpent, twisting through the air, silent, slow, poisonous. Lena stepped back. Darman pulled her close. "What is that?" he asked. Kiri hovered near the crack, her glow intensifying. And then a sound emerged. Not a growl, not a voice, but a memory. Scream. Not of a creature, but of a person. Lena gasped. "That's Mama's voice," she whispered. Darman stiffened. The mist thickened. The crack widened. And from within, something began to rise. Not a shadow, not like before. This was different. It had no shape, no form, but it brought with it a feeling so heavy Lena could barely stand. It wasn't fear. It wasn't sorrow. It was emptiness, like the absence of everything that mattered. And then, without warning, the garden screamed. Every flower let out a high-pitched chime that rang like shattered glass. The trees bent back, shedding their dead leaves in a frantic flurry. The few butterflies that remained scattered in panic. Kiri hovered in place, trying to steady herself, her glow beginning to crack at the edges. "We have to stop it," Lena cried. "It's destroying everything." "But how?" Darman shouted over the noise. Kiri turned toward them, her body trembling. Then, for the first time since the day she gave Darman her light, she spoke, truly spoke, not with feelings but with sound. "Go beneath." Lena froze. "What do you mean?" "Roots are dying," Kiri whispered. The pain was buried. Too deep. It must be seen. Before Lena could respond, the earth beneath her feet crumbled. Fell. A scream caught in her throat as she plunged into darkness, leaving Darman's hand behind. "Lena!" The world around her was black. And then, like, faint, flickering, she landed on something soft, earth. But it was not like the soil above. It was wet, cold, filled with writhing roots that moved like veins beneath her fingers. Above her, the garden's glow pulsed like distant stars. And in front of her, a figure. First it was just a silhouette. But as her eyes adjusted, she saw. It was her mother, standing barefoot on the roots. Will is closed. "Mama," Lena whispered. The figure opened its eyes. And they were empty. Not cruel. Not warm. Just hollow. "You shouldn't be here," it said in a voice that didn't sound like her mother, but wore the shape of it. "You're not her," Lena said, her voice shaking. "I am every piece you buried," the figure replied. "Every word you wanted to say. Every hug you never got to give. Every bedtime story that stopped halfway." Lena shook her head. "You're not her. But I live because of her. Because of you. Because of him." The figure pointed upward. and the earth above trembled. "You have kept your pain," it said. "You buried it in the garden, fed it with silence, watered it with dreams." Lena looked around. The roots were dying, cracking, bleeding black sap. "You built a garden on top of your grief," the voice whispered. "And now it is breaking." Lena fell to her knees. She had no words, only tears. She cried, not like a girl who missed her mother, but like a child who never learned how to stop missing her. Every sob was heavy, every breath a storm. And then she felt it. Warmth. Small wing. Kiri had followed her. The butterfly landed on her shoulder, and for a moment, the underground chamber lit up. Lena looked at the shadow figure of her mother, and she said the words she had always held in. "I love you. Miss you. But I'm not going to live in the dark anymore." The figure blinked and smiled. A real smile. For just a moment it looked like her. And then it was gone. The roots stopped writhing. The mist vanished. Above, the garden pulsed with light. And below, Lena stood alone. But she felt no fear. Only the first true breath of healing. The light above shimmered. A thin beam broke through the ceiling of the underground chamber, casting soft gold across the floor of sleeping roots and tangled memories. Lena stood still in the quiet, her chest rising slowly as if for the first time. She was breathing without pain pressed against her ribs. Kiri hovered beside her, not glowing with power, but with peace. The roots that had once trembled now lay still. Their color had returned, faintly green, tinged with gold. Some reached gently toward Lena's feet, no longer recoiling as they had when the darkness rose, but stretching, tentatively, hopefully. The chamber no longer felt like a place of fear. It felt like a memory, old, wounded, but no longer bleeding. Lena looked around, her fingers brushing the nearby bark. She was not trapped. Not anymore. The ground beneath her pulsed once. The roots moved aside. And then, as if lifted by invisible arms, she began to rise. The garden opened to her. Above, Darman shouted her name. He was still at the edge of the cracked earth, dirt on his hands, sweat on his brow, eyes filled with panic and guilt. But when he saw Lena being lifted from the depths, floating gently with Kiri at her side, his voice caught in his throat. She landed softly. The crack sealed itself behind her. The garden exhaled. Trees lifted their branches toward the sky. Flowers reopened with soft rustles like waking breath. The butterflies emerged once more, hundreds of them, no longer afraid. Their wings shimmered not with magic, but with clarity, as if they too had remembered something they had tried to forget. Darman dropped to his knees. He didn't speak. He simply opened his arms. And Lena, without hesitation, ran into them. They held each other for a long time. The wind passed through the leaves like a lullaby. No words were needed. The silence said everything. When they finally parted, Lena looked around. "It wasn't just grief buried down there," she said. "It was everything we never said." Darman nodded. "I know. I could feel it, even from here." He helped her sit beneath the tree at the center of the garden. Kiri rested on a low branch, her wings pulsing faintly. Other butterflies joined her, their colors glowing in harmony, no longer bright from power but from unity. For the first time in many days, Lena didn't feel like the garden was hiding something from her. It was revealing something. She turned to Darman. "Do you think it was our sadness that poisoned the garden?" "Not just sadness," he said slowly, "but silence. We locked our hearts and threw away the keys. And this place, it remembered everything we tried to forget." The truth settled between them like dust in sunlight. Kiri fluttered down and circled them both. Then something unexpected happened. A flower bloomed, one they had never seen before. Grew in seconds. Its petals were deep blue, edged with gold, and when it opened fully, it sang. Not like a song with words, but a vibration, a hum that spread through the garden, waking every root and leaf. Other flowers began to follow. New ones. Not from memory but from healing. Lena gasped. Is it growing again? Darman smiled. No. It's being reborn. And so it was. What had once been a place to escape grief became a place to understand it. The garden no longer belonged to sadness. It belonged to truth. To love. To the memories that hurt and healed at once. 4 hours they walked through the newly growing paths. Every corner of the garden pulsed with light and story. Where once shadows had gathered, small fireflies now danced. Where the soil had cracked with darkness, soft moss covered the ground like green velvet. They found places Lena had never explored before. A stone bench under a tree with bark like bronze. A still pond that reflected not their faces but their emotions. A pathway made of blue petals that pulsed when touched. The garden was alive. And it remembered. It remembered Lena's laughter when her mother danced in the kitchen. It remembered Darman's voice reading bedtime stories. It remembered the lullaby that once echoed through sleepless nights. It remembered everything. And because it remembered, it forgave. But peace like light must be guarded. Late in the evening, as the sky turned deep purple and the stars above began to shimmer, Kiri flew higher than ever before. She reached the tallest branch of the central tree, where the wind blew strong and wild. From there she released a pulse of light. Not bright, but wide. It spread across the garden in a ripple, and Lena felt it inside her bones. A warmth that touched the very edge of her soul. Darman looked at Kiri with awe. What is she doing? She's anchoring it, Lena whispered. She's making it stay. This time for good. Kiri's wings slowed. Her light dimmed. And then, without a sound, she rested once more. This time not because she was broken, but because her work was done. She became part of the tree. Her glow fused with the bark, like a scar that became beauty. The other butterflies gathered there, circling the branch like stars around a moon. Lena stepped forward and placed her hand on the trunk. She gave everything, she said softly. Darman put his hand beside hers. So did you. The garden grew quiet again, not with fear, not with sadness, but with rest. The kind of silence that comes after healing. The kind that doesn't need to be filled. And as they turned to leave, the archway glowed softly once more. It opened for them like a friend saying goodbye. Lena stepped through. Darman followed. Behind them the garden waited. It would always be there. Not as a secret, but as a memory. A place born from pain, rebuilt by love, and made sacred by a butterfly who knew how to carry both. Rain had returned to the village. Not the kind that thundered and shattered roofs, but a soft, steady rain that seemed to wash everything gently. Rooftops, soil, memory. It had been a week since Lena and Darman last stepped into the garden. Not because they had forgotten, but because something had changed in them. They no longer needed the garden as a refuge. They carried pieces of it with them now. In the way they spoke, in the way they shared meals, in the way Darman sometimes smiled at the smell of rain and said, "She used to love this kind of weather." Kiri's absence was felt, but not like a wound. She was not gone, just transformed. Every time Lena passed the old scarf she had wrapped her in, or heard a butterfly's wings flutter near the window, she smiled. Even the air in the house had changed. It no longer carried the weight of silence, but the warmth of a home rediscovered. But peace does not make the world forget. And late one evening, as the rain slipped across the glass and the fire crackled low, there came a knock at the door. Lena sat up from the floor where she had been drawing. Darman looked toward the sound, his brow creasing. They weren't expecting anyone. And no one from the village ever visited anymore. Another knock. Slower this time. Darman stood cautious. "Stay here," he whispered to Lena. But she followed anyway, standing just behind him as he opened the door. There, soaked in the rain, stood a boy. No older than 13. His clothes were torn at the edges, his hair dripping wet, and his eyes, deep, wide, dark brown, held a hollow look Lena recognized too well. He said nothing at first. He just looked at them, then behind him toward the forest. I didn't know where else to go," he whispered. Lena's breath caught. Darman opened the door wider without asking another question. "Come in," he said. The boy stepped inside slowly, like someone unsure if they were allowed to take up space. Lena fetched a towel and wrapped it around his shoulders. He didn't resist. His skin was cold. His fingers trembled. They gave him soup. He didn't speak for a long while. Not until the fire had warmed the room and Darman had returned from grabbing dry clothes. The boy sat beside the window and whispered, "I saw it too. The garden." Lena blinked. Her spoon dropped. "What did you say?" she asked. He looked up at her, finally meeting her eyes. "There's something glowing in the forest," he said. "I've seen it for days. Every time I walk by the river's bend, I see a light through the trees. But no matter how close I get, it disappears." Darman sat down slowly across from him. "You've been trying to find it," he said. The boy nodded. "I don't know why. It just feels like it's calling." Lena leaned closer. "What's your name?" The boy hesitated, then said softly, "Bayou." She exchanged a glance with her father. Bayou was not like them. He hadn't stumbled into the garden by accident, or been led by sorrow or silence. He had been called. Lena remembered what Kiri had said in the garden. This place, it remembers, heals, but it also chooses. That night, after Bayou had fallen asleep on the couch, curled under a thick quilt, Lena and Darman stood by the window. "He saw it," Lena whispered, "even before stepping through." Darman nodded. "Maybe the garden needs something. Or maybe someone else needs it now." Lena turned toward the quiet boy, sleeping peacefully for the first time in who knew how long. I think it's not just our garden anymore." They didn't wake him. But the next morning, as the rain faded and clouds broke open to reveal soft dawn light, Bayou woke before anyone else. He stood at the window, drawn by something deeper than curiosity. And then he whispered a single word. "Help!" Lena heard it. She was already awake, sitting on the stairs. "Do you want to go?" she asked gently. Bayou nodded. "I think there's something broken in me, and I don't know what it is. But when I saw the light, I didn't feel so lost." Lena stood, walked to the coat rack, and took her old rain jacket, the one with the faded butterfly patch near the collar. She handed it to him. "Then let's go," she said. Darman joined them at the door. The three of them made their way through the wet forest, the air crisp with the scent of leaves and damp earth. Birds called softly from branches above, and though the trees stood still, there was something watchful in the way they bowed. Bayou moved slowly, but he moved with purpose. And when they arrived at the vine-covered arch, it glowed, brighter than it had for Lena in days. Bayou stepped forward first. The vines parted. The garden was waiting, but it had changed. Where once Lena had found a golden field of light and butterflies, now the garden had grown wilder, more alive. The roots were greener, the petals brighter, the butterflies larger and more vivid. New trees had grown, some with bark that shimmered in patterns. The pond had expanded, and the central tree, the one where Kiri had become part of the wood, now stood taller, with a crown of white leaves that sparkled even in the morning haze. Bayou stepped through, and the garden sighed. A wind rustled the branches. Kiri's resting place glowed faintly. Lena watched, her heart full. Darman placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's changing," he whispered. "No," Lena said softly. "It's growing." Bayou wandered into the center. He reached out and touched a flower. It glowed beneath his hand. And suddenly his body jolted. He gasped. Tears poured down his cheeks. But he didn't cry out. He fell to his knees, clutching his chest. And then he laughed. Not wildly, not loudly, but freely. Lena stepped forward, watching in awe. The garden had begun again. And it would keep beginning. For those who needed it. For those who had forgotten how to feel. Just like her. Just like her father. And now just like Bayou. Morning deepened slowly into late day. The light through the trees cast long shadows that moved gently across the clearing. Lena sat under the central tree, her knees drawn to her chest, watching Bayou wander deeper into the garden. His fingers brushed every leaf, every petal, every trunk as if learning how to trust the world with his skin again. The butterflies swirled around him like threads of memory. Delicate, glowing, quiet. Lena did not disturb him. She understood too well what he was walking through. The stillness. "Oh, hey," he cried now and then. Not in a burst, but in a trembling of the shoulders. He would pause, stare at the pond or at the silver bark of a young tree, and just let it rise. Let it fall. The garden held him. The way it had held her. And watching him, something bloomed in her chest. Not pain this time. Not sorrow. But a strange, tender pride. Darman sat a little farther back, quietly sharpening a branch into a walking stick. Not because he needed one, but because the act gave his hand something to do while his heart stayed still. He looked around often, not with fear, but with reverence. This place had once been a wound. Now it was a miracle. Kiri's resting place pulsed gently above. No longer bright, no longer silent, but steady. Lena stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. She approached Bayou slowly, and he turned toward her with wide, tired eyes. "I saw her," he said softly. "In the pond. For just a second." Lena nodded. "Kiri." He shook his head. "No, my sister." That made her pause. "I had a sister," he said. "Little. Loud. She died 2 years ago. I don't even remember what color her hair was. But in the pond. Saw her. And I remembered everything." Lena placed a hand over her heart. "She was laughing," Bayou continued. "In the reflection. Like she used to. Before she got sick. Before everything broke." They sat together in the grass, and for a while neither spoke. The wind passed through the garden like a sigh. Then came the whisper. From everywhere. From nowhere. A voice without language. But it filled them with meaning. Lena turned toward the tree. Kiri's branch shimmered. The bark at its center began to shift, to glow with 1,000 swirling lights. And slowly, it opened. A seam in the wood, barely noticeable at first, widened into a doorway. Not a door made of wood or vines, but of air, light bending and curving, inviting them in. Lena stood startled. So did Bayou. Even Darman looked up, rising to his feet with hesitation in his bones. The butterflies flew toward the opening, one by one. They did not vanish inside. They circled it like guards. Or guides. The voice came again. Come see. Lena looked at her father. He nodded. And so she stepped through. Bayou followed. Inside there was no darkness. Only memory. Not hers. Not exactly. But everyone's. They stood in a space that wasn't a room. It felt like standing inside a memory itself. Shifting and glowing. All around them were fragments of lives. A mother brushing her daughter's hair beside a well. A boy weeping into a closed window. A man kneeling at a grave, fingers pressed against the earth. Laughter. Screams. Silence. Not ghosts, but echoes. Lena's chest rose with quiet wonder. These were the hearts of those the garden had touched. Even those who never found it. Bayou moved slowly, watching each shimmer of light like a child in a dream. What is this? He asked. Lena whispered. I think this is what the garden remembers. They walked deeper. The path beneath them was made of glowing petals. The walls of light pulsed softly with color. Reds, greens, blues, golds. Then they reached a clearing. At the center stood a single tree. Not like the one outside but older. Covered in bark the color of moonlight. Its branches were long but not heavy. At its base, thousands of tiny lights gathered. Like stars. Or tears. Lena approached slowly. At the base something shimmered. Mirror. But when she looked into it, she didn't see her face. She saw Kiri. Floating still. Her wings slightly open. Her glow dim but alive. Bayou stepped beside her. He saw his sister. Darman, standing near the entrance, saw his wife. They all gasped quietly. None of them dared to speak. And then the mirror dissolved. And the tree spoke. Not with sound. With warmth. With knowing. And then Lena understood. This is the garden's heart, she said. This is where it keeps what people leave behind. Bayou reached toward one of the lights. It hovered near his palm, then gently floated into it. His hand closed and a tear slid down his cheek. I remembered her laugh, he whispered. Lena looked around. It doesn't just take sadness. Keeps joy. The good things. So we don't lose them. They sat there for a long while. Resting. Feeling. Healing. Then one by one the lights began to rise. Back toward the tree. Back toward the ceiling. Outward into the garden. Lena felt her heart pull. Not in pain. But in purpose. They stepped back through the door. And when they emerged, the garden looked different. It was no longer golden. It was everything. Every color. Every shape. Every sound. Flowers of every hue. Trees that shimmered with layers of bark. Butterflies with translucent wings like glass. Even the sky above had changed. Felt endless. Bayou stood still. This place doesn't just heal, he said. It listens. Lena nodded. And now it's ready to listen to more. From that day on they returned. Not every day. Not always together. But the garden became part of them. And slowly they guided others. People who had lost. People who forgot how to feel. People who no longer knew how to say goodbye. The archway opened for them. And the garden never stopped growing. Not as a secret. Not as a miracle. But as a truth. That even broken hearts can bloom again. And that sometimes. Little girl. Butterfly. And a place that remembers. Can save the world. Dear listeners. From the journey of Lena, the magical butterfly Kiri, and the hidden garden, we learn that pain in the heart is not something to be buried forever. In fact, it is often through pain that we discover parts of ourselves we never knew existed. Sometimes grief, silence, and sorrow are not signs of weakness. but the very path toward true healing. We witnessed how Lena embraced her sadness, not to drown in it, but to transform it into strength. Kiri the butterfly showed us that healing others sometimes requires quiet sacrifices. And the magical garden. It became a symbol that behind every sorrow, there is hope, as long as we have the courage to face what hurts instead of running away. This story also reminds us that love never truly disappears. It only changes shape. It becomes a memory, a light, a whisper in the stillness. The garden is a reflection of our own hearts, a place to hold what we've lost, care for what remains, and make room for what is yet to come. However, it is important to note that this story is fictional. It is a made-up tale crafted to feel real, created to inspire, to heal, and to offer meaningful lessons about life. All characters, places, and events are imaginary, yet we hope they speak to something deeply true in your own story. Thank you for listening to this story all the way to the end. If this story touched your heart, gave you comfort, or reminded you that you are not alone, please don't forget to like, leave a comment, and subscribe to this channel. Your support means so much to us, and it gives us the strength to continue sharing heartfelt stories that matter. Until we meet again in the next story, dear listeners.